Hello and welcome to our session 2 on early childhood education. Today we are going to talk about development matters, but in a bit from a bit different perspective, and we will also talk about characteristics of effective learning. And before that, I would like to have a quick review on session 1 so that we have a natural continuation towards the content of this session 2. So the objectives for this session are 3. First, we would like to encourage you to have a broader outlook on a child's individual characteristics that affect development and learning. And then, as I mentioned, we will get more specifically into the fundamental characteristics in specific areas. And the objective 3 is to discuss characteristics of creative learning itself. The review from session 1 could look like that. And just to remind you, we have talked about conceptualizing and defining early childhood education as a field of study. We talked about the scope of the early childhood education field and about its multidisciplinary nature, and about the goal and key tasks of early childhood education, and also about general principles of operation in the field. We also talked about the facts related to the early childhood growth, development, and learning. We talked about brain, about plasticity of brain, about sensitivity periods, and about the importance of experiences that the child is exposed to in early years, so that to ensure that the development and the learning processes are supported. We then talked about the prime areas of growth and development and learning, and first we defined what the prime areas were and why we talked about the prime areas in the first place. We also talked about the age periodization and about actually challenges that this aspect poses to us. And then we went into the prime areas themselves. And the first prime area was on personal, social, and emotional development of early children. We then went into communication and language prime area. And last but not least, we talked about the physical development prime area. Today, I would like to start with the individual characteristics of a child that will affect or have an impact on a child's development. It's very important to understand these things before we actually get into specific areas of development. So we will talk about 4 things. As for now, we will talk about the temperament, about personality, about gender, and about individual learning needs. So let's start with the temperament. Temperament is defined as a set of innate characteristics, behavior style, in terms of behavior style and in terms of emotional response of a child. Why it's important to talk about this is because the child is born into this world with a certain, let's say, blueprint, of certain characteristics, and temperament is one of them. So Let's see what actually is so special about the temperament as a one characteristic. Temperament tells us about how the child responds to certain things, as opposed to what and why he responds a certain way. So temperamental characteristics are usually observed in a way the child expresses his reaction to, let's say, new people, new experiences, new situations, new environments. I give you a few examples here. So the way the child reacts, let's say, uh, towards tasting new foods or connecting with new people or just going outside on a trip or just seeing basically a father who has just shaved his beard, for example, you will see different responses and different reactions from a child. And this is due to his temperament. And different children will have different reactions. So we cannot talk about the unified way of reacting to certain things, because this is something that is very individual and very unique to each child. We can look next at the dimensions of temperament in terms of attitudes to the outside world, and also later in terms of reactions to the outside world. Let's start with the attitudes towards the outside world. So we have two aspects to consider here. One is how easily the child gets distracted by the stimuli or by certain aspects happening in the environment. So this tells us, or this is how actually the reactions are expressed, either whether the child is easily distracted or whether the child still maintains his concentration for a longer period of time. It will also happen differently in different children, and it is all fine. This is just a characteristic of a child. Another aspect we can talk about here is the activity level. So this is in terms of periods of time being active as opposed to being inactive. So this is also as one expression of the attitudes towards the outside world, because some children get very easily and very in a very excitedly into some activities, and some children will be more let's say distant or more more hesitant. So this is through this behavior you can talk about the activity level of a child. And next we can look at another dimension, which is reaction to the outside world. And reaction to the outside world can be described in let's say four aspects. The first one, we call it insecurity level. So this is about the response to a new person or new object or situation or experience. You will always see the situation that a child may react with a smile or maybe with a cry when he will see a new person or when he is in the context of new experience. So observing the child's reaction to the outside world, you can talk about child's security or insecurity level. Some children will feel more insecure and some children will feel less, which is all fine. Another aspect we can talk about here is emotional sensitivity. And this is about the intensity of reactions. So let's assume in a new situation, one child is more happy and he is absolutely fine, but another child will be maybe crying. And this is about the intensity of his reaction, intensity of his cry. Is he able to calm down within a very short time, or is he really taking his time because he is overwhelmed with his emotional reaction? So by this, we can also talk about the child's emotional sensitivity. Another aspect is we call it general mood. So this is just about having a good, friendly, joyful, pleasant mood or behavior, as opposed to unpleasant or unfriendly behavior. This is also characteristics which will be expressed differently in different children, or maybe in different times, different general mood in the same child. And the next characteristic is adaptability. This is about how the child is able actually to adapt to the changes in the environment. You have always seen the child who is, let's say, very open-minded and very eager to experience, and he's just getting into the new context or new situation or in the contact with new people, and it's absolutely fine with him. But then you have seen children who are, let's say, very slow to warm up, yeah? And this is also a characteristic of a child, which is good to keep in mind always when you as practitioners or as parents raise your children. So getting further with our topic of temperament, we can talk about three basic types of children. Of course, this is not a standard, let's say, classification, and new dimensions can be added, but roughly we can define or we can identify three types: easy children, difficult children, and slow to warm up children. Of course, there are variations, as I say, and of course there are different days and different situations that we will see different reactions even from the same child. But roughly you can still distinguish between these three types of children. And if you are interested in combining the aspects that we've talked through so far, this is the table for your reference, where you can have this look at the match matrix, I could say so. In terms of these three types of children: easy, difficult, and slow to warm up, and also in terms of characteristics I've described as reaction to this outside world and attitudes to the outside world. There are also other classifications which talk about temperamental characteristics in children in a slightly different way. Just to give you an example, one classification defines most common types of temperament like this, and these are the types choleric, phlegmatic, sanguine, and melancholic children. There is another recently discovered type, it's called supine, but we will not go into details. These are just other ways to talk about the similar characteristics we've talked so far in terms of reactions to the outside world and attitudes to the outside world. And if you are interested, there is a reference in the actually previous slide under the table. You can look into that and discover more of research conducted by Thomas and Chess. So child's temperamental characteristics are not something that is given forever. We have to understand that there is always, of course, a blueprint coming with the child in his brain, in his body. But whatever characteristics we actually talk about, we understand that they are undergoing changes and modifications as the child grows and develops. So nothing is really here and forever. We have to look at characteristics as something which are susceptible to change. And this change, of course, happens with the help of and with the support of people around and environment around the child. So type of temperament just provides an orientation to us. So type of temperament as we described by now, it's just about describing how the child may feel and react and behave or even learn, but it's not really defining how the child will turn out. So this is just an information to keep at the background of your mind as a practitioner, that each child is unique, as we talked about earlier, and each child will have his own, let's say, innate template in terms of temperament and characteristics. But these things are going to change through the child's life or the person's life. Next, we can talk about the aspect called personality, which is actually very closely related to the temperamental characteristics. You have, of course, observed the child who, let's say, behaves or relates to things in a different way, and different children will have this behaviors different. Some child will be more wandering around, and some child will be very proactive, and some child will be occasionally lost, and some child will be puzzled about what's going on, and so on and so forth. So personality is also a characteristic that is coming partly with the child, but it's also something that the environment and the people around are able to shape. So we have to talk about the importance really of developing attachment and trust and trust with the child in order to make him feel secure and safe and develop his independency. So these things will help to shape the personality of a child. We could next talk about another aspect, another individual characteristic. It's gender, and I could start with saying that it's actually really well researched and observed that there are different developmental patterns in in children of different gender, boys and girls. These factors are both physical and psychological, and in most cases, differences between genders have complex causes, representing a combination, like I say, of innate physical or hormonal and psychological characteristics. But it's also important to say that the environment also models the idea of gender to a child, and it is often reinforced by parental choices or cultural interpretations. But if to look at the typical characteristics of gender behavior, and of course we keep in mind that we discuss this in a really common and very general sense, this is not any clear-cut perspective on different behaviors in girls and boys. But general observations suggest that girls are having their own play pattern, they are having their own behavior pattern, as opposed to boys' behavior pattern, and girls are more likely to learn certain skills ahead of boys, and girls express certain interest, like I say, in certain toys or in certain environmental features or their own appearance, and they tend to be more cooperative. This is something which is also like a sort of imprint. Of course, we can also mention that there are, of course, different girls, and in some girls these characteristics will be observed much clearer than in other girls. Boys, again, they tend to be more physical and more competitive, and they are more interested in toys like construction or vehicles, and they will have, due to this, they will have a slightly their own behavior pattern. So again, as I said, these are just characteristics that give the direction, but we should keep in mind that different girls and different boys will still have their own interests and their own characteristics and behavior patterns. So when we raise children, of course, we as adults, we should be aware of the thing that the child needs support and help with defining their gender, and of course we should also keep in mind our cultural and societal perspectives and interpretations, and also parenting. It's very much about parenting style, as I mentioned, that sometimes parents just like reinforce certain understanding of gender, which is all fine, because we live in a diverse world, and we live in a world of interpretations, and it is important to help the child to define his gender. One thing I would still like to kind of warn practitioners and parents against is that we don't have to make really a big deal out of gender, or like teaching certain stereotypes or stigma related to the gender of a child. We should rather encourage individuality of each child, because this is what we are actually looking at as the utmost goal, of upbringing and raising a child. Of course, we provide a healthy role model, but like I say, there should not be probably like too much emphasis on certain stereotypes. And why I say so is because it's very natural for children of early age to be actually involved and engaged in activities of both genders. It's just the way they explore the world around. It's just the way which is natural for them to be. So what we can do is just we provide an environment, rich in activities, and environment with both role models, gender role models, and so that for the child to experience that. Now, when we have talked about gender, we could talk about the individual learning needs as another characteristic which we should keep in mind as practitioners in order to address and support issues or maybe mild aspects in the process of growth and development. What I would like to start with is maybe to define, or let's say redefine, what actually we would mean by individual learning needs. Needs do not always mean any special needs, something to do with, let's say, disability. It is just so natural that every child has some needs in help. Some child will have will need maybe more assistance and help with the, let's say, learning to walk, and some children will have more need with language skill, need for help with language skills. There can be a variety of different needs, even like in the same child. So learning need doesn't have to be defined as something really very serious, almost as a medical diagnosis. Learning needs, they are just in every child, and every child needs help and support with something, starting with emotional self-regulation and ending up with practical skills, let's say cutting with scissors or putting the shoes on. So every child will have their little or bigger needs. So now when we define it this way, we could talk about actually, of course, the extent of the need. Some needs emerge and are taken care of and are there just for a short period of time. And of course, there are needs which are more severe, but again, examples of just needs that are typical to every child. They can be addressed with the very basic tools in everyday life of a practitioner. Maybe we just do some physical exercise, or maybe we just work on like I say, emotional status of a child with basic advice. So this is something that is in everyday practice from morning to the evening. And then, of course, we can talk about individual needs, which are probably emergent just in a small minority of children, and they might be characterized as more long-lasting needs, and they might need help of multidisciplinary professionals and in a more systematic way. But these kind of needs are usually having a medical background. So whatever the need is, it's important to remember that it's absolutely normal that every child needs support in something. Every child needs help with something. So how to address the learning needs? As I've mentioned, it can be anything from a very mild remedial intervention up to multi-professional support. Whatever the type of support or extent of support is, we always aim at promoting the child's health, growth, well-being, and of course, the whole family's well-being. Now, when we have covered the individual characteristics of a child, we can go actually further, and we could start talking about specific areas in development and learning. What we have to remember is that whatever specific area of development and learning we are talking about today, they always have their roots in the prime areas we have discussed in the previous session. So now let's first have a look at what specific areas we are going to talk about. There are 4 areas: literacy, mathematics, understanding the world, and expressive art and design. They can be defined maybe in a different way, but this is for you to. This classification comes, as I've mentioned in the first session too. This classification comes from the material I also anchor my my presentation on development and growth. It's called Early Years Foundation Stage material. The link you are provided with by now. So these areas, as I mentioned, they can be defined in just technically other words, but basically what we talk about is we talk about specific areas which grow out of prime areas, and they actually mean that specific areas actually mean that we talk about knowledge, about broader or more specific knowledge and skill areas for children in order to function in a society in a successful way. So when we talked about prime areas, we talked more about the fundamental characteristics of development and growth of child. And now when we talk about specific areas, we talk about, let's say, unlocking the world in front of the child in terms of information, in terms of new knowledge, in terms of new, more specific skills. This is why we consider them as two separate blocks, prime areas in session 1 and specific areas now in session 2. So skills like knowing how to read and write and to do maths or calculations or whatever concepts are related to math thinking, they are taught only as a, let's say, as an addition to the prime areas. So if we start with the first specific area, which is named literacy, we can talk about, of course, skills like reading and writing. But we again keep in mind that before the skill of literacy is being developed in children, it's important to make sure that his language and communication skills are taken care of. Children need, of course, a lot of opportunities, and they are naturally exposed to different environments and opportunities to develop their literacy skills. It starts with recognizing your name in terms of sound in very young children, and then it may extend to looking for, the first letter of my name in some words, which I will say around the house or around my community. So literacy is actually everywhere where you have a visual representation of the written language or like even the verbal language in a written format. So literacy is literacy skill, of course, requires exposure of a child to various experiences and to also to various experiences, both indoors and outdoors. What could be enabling environments, and what could be the practices that actually support development of literacy skills? Of course, we as practitioners, and as I mentioned, we always emphasize that the written language and symbols and notes and numbers and words, they are everywhere and they are available. It's just for us to sometimes draw the attention of a child to this science. Of course, it's natural that we are reading books and we are rhyming with children and we are singing songs and we are looking through the pictures. These all are the tools that help developing literacy. Another important practice could be linking actually language acts with physical movement, so that the child will be involved in a range of role play or in a range of expressive forms of language. As I mentioned last time, it's very important to let's say merge prime areas, of development. I talked last time about linking language and physical development areas. So this is what we continue doing when we develop literacy skills in children. We don't just, let's say, rhyme or read a rhyme to them. We can add a finger play to the rhyme, so that the rhyme will also have another form of expression. And this is very important for children, because the more areas or the more forms are in actual activity or action, the more effect it will actually have in terms of child development. So I would encourage you to use as many combinations as possible in terms of combining different skill areas and promoting the various expressive forms. And next effective practice is, of course, providing opportunities for conversation in various group arrangements. Of course, it depends on the age. When the babies are very little, it's of course face-to-face and mostly one-to-one type of communication. But when the children get bigger, of course, you can pair them. You can set small group activities that would involve language and conversation. And actually, language is, by definition, language is in almost every human activity. So the more opportunities, the more chance the children will have to listen to or otherwise to verbalize by themselves, the stronger foundation for literacy skills we are actually building. Right. So the second specific area we talk about today is mathematics in a very broad sense. Mathematical concepts are really many, and it is very important just to observe the natural behavior of a child, because children are looking for certain patterns or connections or making relationships through their natural action. So what we observe, we will find children operating with many mathematical concepts actually in everyday life. Like I give an example, starting with quantities and numbers and counting, and going to more complicated tasks like sorting and matching or classifying or sequencing. And as you yourself understand, like anything from counting the number of fingers on the left hand or on the right hand to counting how many buttons you have on the jacket, all these activities are actually falling under this category of developing mathematical skills in children. So it is natural, as I mentioned, for children to use, also to look for, but also to use their mathematical knowledge and skills to solve problems, to generate new assumptions, and to make connections across actually various aspects of learning and development. It doesn't mean that you have to just sit with a child or arrange a certain situation that you would really go into teaching mathematical concepts. It means more that mathematics is everywhere. It's just for us adults, practitioners, to draw the child's attention towards these aspects, both indoors and both outdoors, because by definition, environments are very mathematical. We can count many things. We can talk about sequencing in many instances, and so on. So how to help a child to advance with his mathematical thinking and his mathematical knowledge? Here are a few effective practices. So, of course, in the first place, we would recommend to just provide sufficient time and space, and, of course, mathematical resources, and a lot of positive encouragement to a child, so that the child will will have opportunity to discover mathematical ideas and concepts and words. This is, like I say, about us adults providing the environment and providing the opportunity and naming the things in mathematical terms for the children. Of course, it's always good to involve a child in a real-time problem. As I mentioned, the more natural the environment for the child to learn, the more effect we will have. It's not natural for children to learn in certain setup situations. So real-world problems are really everywhere. So by that, I mean that mathematical thinking can be practiced also like everywhere. Like I give an example, it starts with the things like dressing up and counting fingers and buttons or shoes or your friends' left and right shoes or whatever. Going into more complex aspects like finding or discovering patterns. If you go outside with a child, you will find certain pattern, let's say in how trees grow, or in how plants bloom, or in how stones or seashells at the beach can be arranged. So the more real-time situations we create for children, the more natural the learning process is. Another effective practice is, of course, as I've mentioned, is using both indoor and outdoor environments, and keeping an eye open, and being able to draw child's attention towards these things. When you read stories, when you do songs, they are also actually occasionally filled with mathematical concepts. So combine these different expressive forms or different dimensions and involve both language and literacy skills as well as mathematical skills, and then you will have a good foundation for making a solid connection in child's head about how different things can be described in different terms. We can next talk about another specific area, which we call here understanding the world around. Again, naturally, it just happens naturally that children are surrounded, by certain environments, by certain contexts. So the more children learn about the world around them, the more they will also understand their own place in that world and understand themselves. They will build better self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-value. As we talked about in our first session, it's very important to promote personal, emotional, and social skills in children. And it helps also with the help of extending and expanding the world around your child. So the more opportunities you provide, the more rich environment and the more rich understanding in the child's head will be created. So what could be effective practices to support the advance in this direction? This list is probably not even complete. You can always come up with more ideas, but just to give you some key points here. So, of course, we as practitioners need to help and support the child to become aware of different worlds and different experiences, and to create the opportunities for explorations and asking questions about different aspects. And we, in the first place, as practitioners, we have to ourselves be open-minded in order we can help the child to in this direction. Of course, it's again always good to remember that first-hand experience or the experiences in the immediate environments, they are really very helpful, and this is also something which is like naturally there for the child and for the family or for the group of children, where the children will be actively engaged in experimentation, observation, problem solving, and critical thinking and decision making, and so on. And again, use both indoors and outdoors environment as a resource for teaching, understanding the world around. It's also very important to keep in mind that the more open-ended questions we ask, the more we make child think and understand about the world. Of course, by that I don't mean that we always have to get the right answer or the answer we want to get. The main thing is here just to ask the questions. This is a very important first step. Of course, we would like also to encourage children to tell to us or to each other what they have found out or what they have discovered and what do they think. So whatever relates basically to the understanding of the world around, whatever practice relates to that, it has value. And nowadays we talk about use of ICT. This is, of course, also another important aspect to make children aware of ICT opportunities, and also to help them and to teach them how to use these applications and devices available, in order we can extend our understanding of the world around. Next specific area we can talk about is expressive arts and design. This is actually the area which is also naturally there for the child. Once the child starts walking and exploring the environment, he is grabbing the pencil in his hand and he is scribbling something on the paper. This is how the education in this direction starts. So it is strongly linked to play. So it is a really natural kind of part of the play content. Yeah, being involved in expressive art and in design activities. So, of course, what we aim at here is again to provide as much as possible opportunities to explore different materials, different media, or different aspects. I again encourage you to combine different forms of expression, or different, we could call them modes or modalities, in order to extend or to kind of provide a more complex experience and picture for a child. Because, as you know from your own practice, really dancing as an activity really doesn't include music. So you will always have a situation where you combine at least 2 or 3 different forms of expression. Because when we dance, of course, we hear music and we probably sing. And when we do design and technology activity, of course, we use our imagination, and it might be actually related to some role play. So there will be always an intersection of different forms of expression, which is actually for the best of the child. What could be good practices for advancing children in this direction? Here are some suggestions for you. In the first place, of course, again, this is about us practitioners creating the environment where children have access to various media and materials, yes, starting with the very basic crayons and paints and ending up with different props and construction toys. Of course, we need to involve child into activities as much as possible and to minimize situations when we are doing something for the child. It's very important that the child will be an active learner. About that, we will talk more still today. One important thing I would still draw your attention to here is whenever the child is involved in the activity related to expressive arts or design, we should provide them with sufficient time. I know in different settings, let's say in daycare settings, you will always have certain schedules and you will always have certain routine that you cannot be much flexible about, but still we have to remember that it's very important for the child to finish this work, or at least to leave his work at that stage that he is feeling satisfied. And as even better solution, we can talk about leaving his activity visible for him, let's say on a side table, so that he can come back to that when there is a opportunity next time. So it's very important not just to see it from our perspective that we have to tidy up the space or we have to finish it right now and here. It's also about it is actually, we have to see it from a child's perspective in the first place. It's about his effort and it's about his own chance and situation that we want him to support with this. Right. So now let's watch a video which will give you the understanding of similar things we've talked about now, but just in a video format, where you will observe the child as a little explorer and investigator and engineer and problem solver and being imaginative and so on. So, please.
Look closely. Do you see a tiny engineer at work? Watch 6-month-old Max using his thinking skills to solve the problem of getting a favorite toy that's beyond his reach. This is what engineering is, the process of using science and technology to solve real-world problems. Babies and toddlers are natural problem solvers, like Kyle, who's trying to build a zoo.
¿Y qué pasa si, digamos, abrimos aquí? ¿Podrían salir? Ay, sí.
Through their play, children are developing an understanding of patterns, sequencing, and cause and effect. Other times, young children make their own problems to solve, like Casey, who is figuring out how the tissue paper works. Adults can support this learning by describing what children are doing and what they are learning as they explore.
Can you push it back on for me? Good job. Can you turn it off? Can you turn it off for mommy?
And by asking open-ended questions, adults help children focus on the important details that might encourage them to discover a solution. By preschool age, children are building an understanding of systems thinking, that by doing something to one part of a system, like turning a knob, they can influence another part of the system, like the lock on the door. Following Mia's lead means that her mother lets her see the system in action, so she can develop an understanding of how it works.
Watch right here when we lock the door. Look right here. Did you see anything happen?
Yeah. It's a bat.
Adults can help preschoolers learn by supporting them through the engineering process using 3 steps: explore, create, and improve. Young children don't always follow these steps in order. They jump back and forth, and that's typical. Samantha is wondering how to build a bridge with the blocks that will be wide enough for the toy car. Her mother wonders with her about how to start. That is the explore step.
Can you figure out what to use? There's these.
Oh.
Samantha is deep in creating, solving problems, exploring, and experimenting. This is the create step.
Because if the car comes this way, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's gonna go in the water.
Exactly. So what are you going to put there? Look at that.
It works.
Learning from her play and experimentation and then making changes is the improve step. Parents and other adults help by using words to describe what Samantha is discovering, learning, and doing. Young children find many exciting problems to solve in the first 5 years, like how to reach those strawberries. But there's no challenge too big for your engineer, as long as you stay right by his side.
So now we have, when we have a better understanding of specific areas in development and learning, we can get to the next aspect or to the next block. I mentioned we will talk about characteristics of effective learning. First, we define the concept of learning in more precise terms so that we know and we all share the same understanding of the concept itself. So learning in the first place should be viewed as both individual and social. I mentioned the last time that we look at learning and learning always happens through the interaction. And it's true. It's true so, because we need interaction for our individual reflection, for learning happening within the individual, and we also need interaction for learning aspects of social life. When we talk about learning, we also talk about child as an active agent in the process of learning. It is really very important to value the resource of children and to see them as capable learners, even if at times we may feel that they are missing some skills and they are not yet there. But we as practitioners should always keep in mind that by nature, the child is an active learner, and we are not in a position to stop him from being an active learner. It's just about us and about the environment we create in order we promote child's activity level. We also talk about learning in terms of holistic development. Learning doesn't happen separately in a child's heads or legs or hands. Learning happens in the child as a whole entity. And it is really important to keep it again as one of the starting points when we are engaged with children. Any situation can be considered as a learning situation. So we could say that learning happens everywhere. Learning happens in a way that child's previous experiences and also his current interests and his current skills and abilities are taken into account. So learning is happening in a, let's say, a cumulative way. So whatever the previous skill and knowledge and emotion or sensory perception or bodily experience the child has had, the more holistic actually learning becomes. So again, it's not about just equipping child with lots of information or giving him absolutely the right answers about, let's say, why grass is green and why the sun is yellow. It's very much about teaching the skills and attitudes and emotions, as we talked about at the point when we discussed the importance of prime area called personal, social, and emotional development. So learning is also natural when it happens through play, through moving and exploring, working on different tasks or assignments, and when children have an opportunity to express themselves in various ways, as we talked about just now, in terms of movement, in terms of art, in terms of sound, in any different way. So learning is a really multidimensional concept. So if we go next into the characteristics one by one, and we start with the first one, characteristic which we call here engagement. It is very much about a child involved in play and exploration activities. So effective learning, it happens when the child is really interacting with the surrounding environment. When the child is provided with the time, with the space, with opportunities to explore, play, and move around, whatever sometimes we adults think is even maybe inappropriate, it might be actually a very interesting and very engaging and very stimulating activity for the child. There is nothing wrong with the child, let's say, jumping in a puddle, or there is nothing wrong with the child climbing on a tree. This is just, again, about understanding the value of this experience from the child's perspective. So next we will look into the play as actually the most natural and primary activity for the child. And we will talk now about actually the value of play for early childhood education and learning. Play is, as I say, a powerful resource for the holistic development. Child starts playing from the day he is born, and the child plays through his years up to the school, up to the formal education starts. So play is something that allows a child to be active, because in most cases it's child-initiated play. Play is something that allows to explore, to structure the environment, to create social relations, and by that, it also provides the space and opportunity to form own meanings based on own experiences. Play is also about children constructing ideas of themselves and what they are, what is their place, what they can do, what they cannot do, what is the challenge they want to take on, and what is the challenge they might postpone. So play is something that helps child with defining himself as an individual. In play context, the child can also observe what maybe others are doing. It might be his playmates or it might be adults. In play, the child also creates new things, yeah, based on maybe imitation or based on his observations, or he has a chance to actually try and run through this process of error and try in a safe way. In play, children use their imagination that helps them to experiment with different roles and different ideas, which they wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to carry out. Let's say a child plays a fireman or a child plays a superhero. This is something that would not happen in real life, but that is very important for a child to live through different roles, because actually this is how he will also expand his understanding of the world around. And as I mentioned, play is really a very safe environment to experiment and to try and to fail, because we have to understand that failure actually is a part of the learning process. There is nothing wrong with the child trying and experimenting and not succeeding in something. It's absolutely fine to accept that the child will experiment, try, and fail, because by reflecting on his experience of failure, he will redefine his action or his strategies, and this is how this self-reinforced learning actually would happen in child. And we should also understand that play is not necessarily something that that the child does on purpose or deliberately in order to learn. Play is just really such a natural action and way of being for the child that child learns through play. Next, we can look at different types of play. Let's start with an active play. So whatever physical play or outdoor or sports play we talk about, we always talk about an active play. So the child is learning different skills and understands and makes different connections through being active, being on the move. This kind of games or this kind of play or this kind of games you will observe everywhere, because it's natural for a child to move around. Another type of play is we call it make-believe play. So this is when we talk about different role plays or symbolic play or fantasy play or imaginative play or play with the objects. This is what is make-believe play. You have probably seen the children who take a stick in their hands and then they pretend that this is a spoon. Yeah, that would be a make-believe play example. Or you have seen a child who is playing a fairy or a dinosaur or a spaceman, which would be a fantasy or imaginative play. So, which is again, we understand that this is so valuable type of play, and it's very important for us as practitioners to create the enabling environment to help this play happen. Another type of play is creative play. It involves various sensory experiences. It involves music, dance, drama, arts and crafts, or any kind of activity which promotes a child being creative. I just give an example, as in this picture. So the child is sitting in mud, playing something which we adults would probably see as just messing around. But actually, if you look at this play, there is a sense in that play. In the first place, the child set up all the items he needs for the play. Secondly, the child is having sensory experiences because he's having some mud in his hands, and I would even say that the child also has or practices mathematical concepts, because the child is going through measurement or through filling in up to a certain level, or maybe through even counting how many dishes are filled in. So through creative play, we can really address different skills to be developed. Another type of play is called manipulative, and this is normally the play which involves manipulations with different objects, toys, puzzles, or constructions, or blocks, or any type of material which helps to build or construct or manipulate with. And actually, this kind of type of play is, again, one example in the picture. It can be extended. It's not just construction. It is, in the first place, of course, a construction, so manipulative play. But then there might be an extension when you use ICT, yeah, and then you will create something which is called shadow theater, yeah, with the play. So again, you will merge different formats, and you will extend the play even further than the initial play suggests. And the next type of play is called mastery. So this is the play which normally involves literacy and numeracy skills. And this is when we read books, or this is when we rhyme or learn songs with children, or this is also about the board games which involve certain rules. So this is, as we see, just one type of game. And when children are engaged in all this variety of plays, we can surely say that they are developing and they are advancing and they are going through so many different skill areas. Here is a list of some of them. This list is, again, not complete. It can be expanded, because through different types of plays, you will have a chance, or children will have a chance to practice different skills. As some examples suggest here: conflict solving, handling disappointments, being creative, understanding the concepts, using language, because your language is a natural element of many different plays, and going through the rules of communication, and having understanding of what is a safe play and what is not a safe play, and developing fine and gross motor skills, and so on and so forth. So play should not be underestimated, and play should be taken as a serious thing, and as again I say, the most natural type of activity for a child. So now let's look at this dilemma that we as practitioners often face. What is this right balance between play and academics? Let me look at this from the perspective of pedagogy of playful learning. So play can be, of course, a free flow play, but it can be directed play. So when we assign play with learning goals, then we can actually talk about play as a learning method. So we will have different types of play naturally happening in early childhood, from unstructured play to highly structured play. What research suggests that child-initiated play and play which is guided or supported by adult, this combination of these two is the most effective type of play, or the most effective playful learning happens when these two dimensions are involved. Of course, this is not to say that children should not have any space or time for free play, because free play is also a very important part of play. And of course, this is not to diminish the value of highly structured play, but this is about keeping the balance, because as we remember, the child himself should be an active agent. The initiative is also should come from the child, and his interests have to be listened to. So when we think in these terms, we understand why the combination of child-initiated play and adult-supported play is the most effective play. So again, what is required from us practitioners or parents? We are there to support playful learning, to support play with creating environments. So environment should include play supporting elements like time, space, security, freedom, peace, and purposeful tools. So these are all the criteria that we keep in mind when we set up the environment for play. We should also remember that some children may really miss the skill of play. So it doesn't come naturally to all the children that they are able to play. Of course, in most cases, children are born to play, but sometimes children need help, or they just need the, let's say, an initial push. Yeah. So in that case, we really have to understand that when the activity is shared with an adult, with another child, the content of the play becomes more meaningful for the child. Another element we could discuss here is about creating or providing the opportunity for play in small groups, because it's proved by research that children cannot handle big groups due to levels of noise, due to levels of distraction. So optimal combination or optimal environment involves a small group. So small group, by small group, I mean here a few children playing in the same play. Sometimes it can be 2 children, sometimes it can be 3, but this is up to the practitioner to see and evaluate the context, what is the optimal size of a group. And of course, with older children who are heading towards the primary education, the group becomes bigger, but still we would think that the group of 8 or maximum 10 children is about the optimal size of a group to work with. This is not just for us, for practitioners to manage the group. This is more about the children, about what size of the group they can really perform better in. Next element of effective learning is motivation, and it relates, of course, to what we discussed in terms of personal, social, and emotional prime area. But let's look at that in more details. So learning always happens when the child is motivated. Seldom we observe the situation when we force a child and he learns something. This is not natural for the child to be forced to learn something. So that's why it is important to talk about motivation. So by that we mean that children are being curious, involved, concentrated. They keep trying. They enjoy achieving what they set out to do, or even, like I mentioned, even if there is a failure, it's not anything against actually maintaining the level of motivation. It's more about the reaction of a practitioner, how we react to the failure. If we react in positive terms, I think we are not hurting motivation, but rather we promote motivation. So when we talk about motivation, we can talk about two different types of motivation. So we distinguish between something we call intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is something that comes from inside the child, and extrinsic motivation is something which comes from outside of the child. So when we talk about rewarding a child or giving a grade to a child, we really don't target the child's inner intrinsic motivation. So we as practitioners have to be really careful and understand what type of motivation we are working with, or what type of motivation we are actually looking for and want to promote in the child. Of course, the utmost goal is to have a good intrinsic motivation, which in other words could be which could be related to also something we could call positive growth mindsets. So this is the motivation where thinking, child's own thinking and his acting, they really aim at learning, true learning, and not at getting a reward or getting to look good or having somebody to praise you. So this is the utmost goal. I know it's always a question of how we are working with the child to get there. I will still come back to this, but actually I am coming to this right now. So how to promote the intrinsic motivation in a child? First of all, we should remember that we have to be very sensitive to when we observe a child in a play or in any other action. We have to be very sensitive to what we actually see and what we hear. We should listen to the child's interest, to his ideas, to his questions. And if we stick to these ideas and questions and interests, and if we develop a play around the child initiative, then we are heading towards the intrinsic motivation, because by definition, the child is being more involved when the initiative or when the interest comes from the child. Another aspect to promote intrinsic motivation is to give child the opportunity to learn or to play according to his own abilities. Here I could warn you against comparing children to each other. I know this is natural to many practitioners in the field to compare the children, but as we talked about earlier, children develop at different rates, and also different skill areas in the same child, they also develop at different rates. And these things happen differently in different children. So if we start with that thinking, we understand that we should not compare children to each other, who is better or who is worse in what terms. It is about child's individuality. It is about his as we mentioned today, his partly it's about his temperamental characteristics, partly it's about his personality characteristics, and partly it's about his individual abilities. So we should always keep it in mind that every child develops differently. So when we provide the possibility for this development at different pace, we are working towards promoting intrinsic motivation. When we are sensitive and when we are listening to the child and when we are observing what his interests or his initiatives are, we naturally take a child into planning, implementation, and the reflection of activity. So this is also how we work on child's intrinsic motivation. Let's say children are playing outside, and you as a practitioner just pass by and you are observing what they are playing. I will give you an example. They are two kids are sitting in a bucket, which normally would be used for collecting the leaves or some kind of something in the yard. So it's sometimes enough to just listen to what children are saying when they are sitting in that container, in a bucket. Or sometimes it's also good to ask them, as I mentioned, to provide an open-ended questions. What are you doing? Or where are you? Or who are you? So they would say, oh, we are horses. And then as a practitioner, I would say next, okay, so if you are horses sitting in a bucket, is this your boat? Yeah, and then they would be very excited and they say, yeah, that's our boat. And the next question would be, where are you swimming? Or where are you heading to? Yeah, and then they would say, oh, we are heading towards the shore of the river. So by that you kind of provide the child, you listen to what they have as a content of their play. You also guide the play, but you also give them space to develop the play, because next what happens in this play, they realize that it is their boat, and now they are reaching the shore. They are getting out of the boat and they are developing the environment, the setup according to how the play proceeds. So it's very important to let the children plan and discover their play by themselves, and put the implementation and think about what other equipment they could use in this play to enrich this play, or what kind of other actions or what attributes they need in their play. And then when the play is over, it's very important to ask them open-ended questions again to reflect on their play. Like you could ask, so how was your journey and what have you discovered there when you reached the shore, and so on and so forth. So adults are there again to support the play and not to necessarily decide for children what the play is going to be about. So by this, what I mean is that you are naturally advancing child's intrinsic motivation. And as I mentioned, of course, whenever it's a playful learning, so whenever learning happens in a playful way, so through play or through games, it's always fun for children, and it's always adding towards their motivation, which comes from inside them. Next, we could talk about activating methods, which I still connect to the aspect of motivation. As I mentioned, playful learning allows allows the use of various activating methods. So whenever the child is involved, whenever it's his action, and whenever the nature of activity is playful, whenever the child is invited to experience, interact, use their knowledge, emotions, and bodily experiences. Whenever these things are in place, the activity becomes learning, but playful. Of course, as I've already mentioned today, it's about providing various activities involving various mediums, such as words, gestures, expressive art and design, construction, dramatic play, movement, and dance. So whatever has to do with action coming from a child, this is becoming an activating method. This is becoming playful learning. Next characteristic of effective learning we could look at is thinking. And when we talk about thinking, we actually talk about creative thinking and thinking critically. It might sound as a very difficult concept to grasp, but let's try to break it bit by bit. Why we talk about raising children and developing skills of creative and critical thinking. We are all aware that we live in the age where we have access to tons of information through the digital opportunities. What we aim at is more about equipping our children with not so much with information, because information can be discovered nowadays elsewhere, or can be retrieved from let's say other sources. What we look at is that we want to raise children with the right attitudes and the right dispositions, and we want to equip them with certain skills that when they are older, they are able to manage that environment and that amount of information which is around them. So we look at something which we call 21st century skills. This is towards what we are raising our children. We want them to become critical thinkers who evaluate and assess information. And we want them to become creative thinkers because we want them to produce something new. So thinking is important skill to teach and to learn, because it's about understanding what actually exists around, and about understanding the relationships of what exists and interdependencies of what exists. So we want to promote skills that help children to make connections, to understand things in the broadest sense, to understand phenomena, and not so much to learn by heart certain pieces of information. We are not targeting to raise, let's say, walking encyclopedias. We are having access to information. That's not so important. What is more important is about connecting this information all together and understanding that information and the value of that information. So that's where we are heading to. Let's now think what actually kind of skill areas, creative and critical thinking involve. Whenever we talk about creative and critical thinking, of course, by definition, we always talk about imagination, about observation, exploration, discovery, transformation, analyzing, rethinking, and making connections between things so that the experiences and the information becomes meaningful to a child. These are all things which are actually natural and happening naturally through play, as we have just talked about, because children are naturally observers, discoverers, and so on. So this is how we promote the critical and creative thinking through play. That's why I have started with the play, and I talked about the intrinsic value of play, because play is a powerful resource to develop even so difficult skills as creative and critical thinking. And again, because the play or the activity is so multidimensional, of course, critical and creative thinking, they occur in all areas of learning and development. Here is a list of ideas how you could promote critical and creative thinking. This is given from the perspective of both adults and children. And these are the things just piled up here. But these are the things that actually we have already talked through today's session about. So it is about creating the proper environment. It is about modeling the attitudes. It is about modeling the behavior. It is about asking the open-ended questions. It is about giving opportunities for children to explore through different medium like dance, movement, language, drama, art, and also through opportunity to work with different materials, starting with the paper and scissors and ending up with sports equipment. What is again important to emphasize here is that play is a natural type of action for child, and the child will have an idea. Child will also know how to do things, or if he doesn't know, he will ask for help. This is about adults, about practitioners being sensitive towards the child's interests and support them. So even though we talk about big things like critical and creative thinking, in the end we understand that these are actually very, very practical and everyday things that we can create for our children. So to sum up what we have talked about today, we started with individual characteristics such as temperament, personality, gender, learning needs, and we talked about the importance of keeping them always at the back of your mind, because as I've mentioned, and I will repeat again, every child is different. Every child is capable to learn, but every child will learn at their own pace. And that is all accepted and that is all understood, because this is how children develop. Then we talked about specific areas of development and learning, literacy, mathematics, understanding the world around, and expressive arts and design. And we share the agreement that before promoting or advancing skills within these areas, we should first, of course, talk about the prime areas we talked in the previous session. And now we have talked about characteristics of effective learning, which included our discussion on the value of play, our talk on the motivation and the importance of targeting intrinsic motivation of children, and we talked about creative and critical thinking, and we also have gone through some practical tools and effective practices that could help you to work in these directions. And now I would like to thank you for today. Please refer to the Google Classroom, where you will find the this recording available, and also other materials which will be provided to support this to support the content of this session. And please do not hesitate to come up with your questions or suggestions or ideas. They are all welcome. And see you next time. Thank you so much.